Welcome to the third lecture on the visual effects pipeline. If you aren't really pursuing a career in visual effects and you just want to learn how to composite to add effects to your own personal videos and films, then this section won't be too much of an interest to you. But if you just want to follow along out of interest and to see how the pipeline works in the visual effects industry, then by all means watch it. If you are pursuing a career in visual effects, it would be very important for you to at least have a basic understanding of this pipeline, so when you do enter the industry, you at least have an idea of where compositing sits within the visual effects machine, I should say. So I've got a flowchart here which I've written up, and it's quite a broken down and very basic flowchart. I didn't want to complicate it with small parts of post and pre-production and production. I just wanted to use the main areas which you'll encounter as a compositor, and the other areas tend to be subsidiary and not really as big as these ones I've listed here. So we'll start at the front. The main input for a compositor will be the film scans. The film scans come from the production stage, obviously. They are generally digital these days, although film cameras are still used. The term film scans or plates is often used. This is a throwback to the film days, because the film had to be physically scanned on a film scanner and then digitized so it could be used in compositing. These days, red cameras, digital video cameras, high quality production cameras are a lot more prevalent in production, so you'll find that a lot of footage these days is digitized straight from the camera, so there isn't that much scanning. In fact, a lot of scanning companies are now closing down because it's all going digital, which makes it easier for us, but it's of course not too good for the people who used to scan the film. So the film scans will go into editing, where they will be graded, or of course graded separately. I haven't put grading in there, but they can go straight to editing if they don't have any visual effects, or they also feed these three main sections of post-production I've listed here. All these three rely in some way on the original film scans. So we'll start at the top here. CGI is quite a big department in visual effects, and it can usually be broken up again into subcategories of modeling, animation, texturing, lighting and rendering, and there are even more here that I haven't listed, such as rigging, particle effects and things like that. Larger production studios tend to have these categories, whereas smaller production studios might have an artist that specializes in several of these categories, or one or two or something like that. So you do have specialist artists who are just modelers and animators, and you also have artists who are quite proficient in all of these skills, depending on the size of the studio and what the studio requires from the staff. Next you have rotoscoping. Now rotoscoping is a manual technique of creating mattes. You've all probably heard of keying and green screen and blue screen. Well, that is a procedural way of creating a matte. You tell the computer what color you want it to exclude, and it creates a black and white matte based on the chroma or the color of the screen. We're going to get into that in depth later on. But if you have a character and they're not shot on green screen or blue screen, what do you do? Well, that's where rotoscoping comes in. And rotoscoping is essentially a manual method of drawing frame by frame the outline of a character, figure, or object which you would like to extract from the footage. It's a very time-consuming process depending on the complexity of the thing that you want to rotoscope, and often there are rotoscoping teams who will do this. If you are looking to be a compositor and you don't have a lot of experience, you will generally be placed into a rotoscoping role before you take in maybe a junior compositing role. You might pick up some clean-up work or rig removal, maybe some very basic compositing. But generally, if you don't have a lot of experience in compositing, this is where you'll start out. And it's very, very important, good rotoscoping. Often it is seen as a bit of a laborious task and not that important, but I can assure you it's very important. And in fact, I started rotoscoping, and that was how I got my first job, because I didn't just do it as a throwaway job. I tried to do a good job at it, and they picked that up, and I was offered a job based on that, and that's how I started my career. So it is very important, and good rotoscoping is essential to good compositing. And even if you're a lead compositor, I can assure you you'll be rotoscoping, so you'll need to get used to it. Special effects elements, as we talked about earlier, they are things like explosions or puppeteering or prosthetics. They are effects that exist in the real world which are captured in camera. Now, these elements here are generally used as an asset for compositors. So you might have, as we were talking about before, an explosion. They might film an explosion on a black background. That explosion would be used by the compositor in combination with CGI and the film scans and various other elements to create the final composite. So they are very, very important, and often film studios will have special effects libraries or explosion libraries, rain, dust, scratches, particles, all manner of things, blood, splatters. They have huge libraries, and the compositor has access to these special effects libraries. Now, depending on the film, if there are some particular elements which wouldn't normally exist, quite often production crews will go out and shoot custom special effects elements for that film depending on the requirements. So, for example, I worked on a film which was a vampire film, which we had quite particular ways in which we wanted the the vampires to disintegrate and die when they were stabbed with the stake. So they did a lot of custom blood splatters and custom effects for that. So that was particular to that job. And of course, often these effects are kept with permission from the film company and reused in future shows. And so all these three areas feed into compositing, and of course the film scans. The film scans are the basis for the composite. They are often what is used to reference these three categories, and they are used as the base for the composite. So it's very rare that you'll have a shot generally which is all CG. Of course, you might have a photographic background instead of a film scan, but only in very highly complex visual effects shots will the entire shot be all computer generated. An example would be a Pixar film, and of course there are Hollywood films where it's such heavy visual effects that it's just all CG. That does happen. So hopefully that gives you a breakdown of the areas that compositing relies on and where it feeds into. And in the next section we'll be talking about Nuke, which is the compositing software we'll be using in this course.